Hello and welcome to the CAPE podcast. CAPE standing for the Child Abuse Prevention and Education Podcast. My name is Kristi McVie and I am an ex-West Australian police officer who spent 10 years with the police where I was trained as a specialist child interviewer and a child abuse detective. This podcast is all about sharing what I learnt, saw and knew whilst investigating child sexual abuse in the police force. It is also about sharing the knowledge that I gained in that time that helped me with my own parenting of my then 2-year-old daughter. My mission is to help share my knowledge and to help you in your role as parents to keep your kids safe, along with guest experts in the field of child abuse prevention and education, both in person and online. Thank you so much for joining in on the fight to prevent child sexual abuse. Your kids will thank you for it. And welcome back to the CAPE podcast. And I don't know why I say it like that every time, the CAPE podcast. So today's episode is going to be just little old me talking about a couple of the blogs that I've put up on my website the last couple of weeks. I just wanted to share some of this information because not all of you are subscribers to my mailing list, not all of you are subscribers to my blog. And this information is so important sometimes that I feel if I can get it in as many modalities as possible, you know, if it's on social media, if it's on the blog, if it's on the podcast, then we're getting, you know, it's getting shared around in as many ways possible. So, and the other cool thing is that when I talk on the podcast, you're going to get the unedited, crazy version of me just dribbling stuff and thoughts and feelings. And you never know what might come out. So in the last few weeks, I've put out two blogs because of, people have just been asking for stuff. And it's so cool when I get requests because that's what, you know, helps me know what you want to hear and what you want to know about. So I'm always open to requests, which you can email through to me at admin@cape-au.com or go to my website and just fill in a thing. Go into the contact form and you can, you know, send a request through, make a comment on one of my TikToks or on my social media, wherever you can get me. You know, if you want me to talk about something, I'm happy to talk about it. Especially in the last few months, I have had lots of requests, lots and lots and lots of requests. So I am just giving what the people want. So again, all right, so let's start at the sleepover safety guide. I've just released, this came out in my podcast. I'm on the podcast right now. See, I'm dribbling. It's Monday. I'm recording this on a Monday. My brain's not braining very well. Sometimes when I get on here, I think, I'm going to try really hard not to sound like I don't know what I'm doing. And then I dribble and I sound like I don't know what I'm doing. I really do know what I'm doing. I promise. Anyway, so on the blog, I released this last week, but it's in the newsletter. The newsletter's already come out when you actually get this recording. And I talk about sleepover safety. And in that blog, I talk about the fact that, you know, when I was a kid, sleepovers were actually a escape for me. And I say that because my own childhood family, you know, with no shade on my parents or on my family, it wasn't the greatest environment. And I've talked a bit about my parents and my upbringing over the last 30 plus podcast episodes, but, you know, it wasn't the easiest relationship with my parents. They were much older. They didn't really have energy or time for young kids. And so I was quite often went off on sleepovers, had really good memories. I remember being, you know, 11, 12 and year 6, 7 and sitting in my friends' kitchens with their mums, talking to their mums. That's how much I loved sleepovers because I got to see mums in their element, whereas I didn't really have that maternal figure in my life. So I used to think that their mums were the best people ever. And in fact, I'm still friends with some of my friends from primary school and their mums still love me. I mean, what's not to love, really? So I used to spend so much time with their parents and stuff. And then when I became a police officer and I started learning about child safety, I realized that sleepovers are actually very dangerous when it comes to child protection and child abuse. Sleepovers enable and allow abuse so much quicker and easier than what, you know, if they weren't happening. I'm not saying that all sleepovers are dangerous, but there's some major considerations that we need to have when we have kids in our care as a sleepover, or when we send our kids to someone else for a sleepover. And that includes with family, because sleepovers enable and allow for an adult to have power and control over a child, whether they are family or they're someone else. And it's not just adults, it could be older siblings or older relatives or older children in the home. It enables a child to be quite vulnerable when there's no safe adult around, or their adults are around. Now, if you've heard me talk about safe adults before, not all adults are safe to kids. I say in my blog that sleepovers are a huge risk factor if the family or person entrusted with your child's safety isn't safe. Even older children in the care of an unsafe person and family are at risk due to many factors. Looking back on my time, there was at least one or two parents in my childhood that were unsafe. They actually had one dad has been charged with child sex offences. Nothing ever happened when I was there to me, obviously, but he was charged and there was a trial, etc., with the neighbour's child. I think that the circumstances were different. I was without even knowing about my early warning signs, I was very clued in. I used to listen to my gut feelings. I used to, if I wasn't feeling comfortable, or if an adult didn't make me feel comfortable or icked me out or whatever, I was very careful and cautious around them. I didn't put myself in rooms where they could lock me in them. I kept away. I kept my distance. So I think my inbuilt early warning signs, which I didn't know what they were at the time, but that's what we teach kids now as early warning signs, were very strong. So I had I didn't have that. There wasn't many opportunities for people to abuse me, but it could have been a whole different situation had I not been as clued into my early warning signs as I was, and clued into my feelings as I was. Some children struggle to identify when they feel unsafe. They struggle to speak up for themselves. I was not so much for myself. I wouldn't usually speak up for myself because I was a very big people pleaser as a child. It wasn't until I was in the police that I got that kind of got pushed out of me. But when I was a child, I would stand up for other kids first. I would protect other kids first before I'd protect myself. It's interesting when I think back about it, how I became a police officer, etc. But anyway, so let's move on. So here are a few risk factors that we need to consider when our children go and sleep over at someone's house. I'll caveat this with, I might be an ex-detective, an ex-police officer. I have my own views and opinions based on the experiences that I've seen, the things that I've seen and heard. So the reason why I share this stuff with you is because I have good reason to believe what I believe. But I'm never going to tell you what to do with your kids. I hope that you'll take what I say and listen carefully and take it as advice, and hopefully implement some of these things in your lives. But I'm never going to tell you what to do. Okay, so back to the risk factors. So differing beliefs and values between homes. What I think is not okay or safe, someone else might think it's okay and safe and allow children to do it whilst in their care, aka walking around in the streets at night, if you've got tweens, teens, allowing them to drink, staying up late, having their devices on them all night, some websites, some movies. I remember when my daughter was about 10 and she went for a sleepover, for a birthday sleepover. And I know that I say I'm not dead against sleepovers. I'm just very cautious about who I allow my daughter to sleep over with. And this one particular sleepover was with her best friend and friends. And when she came home, she had told me that they'd watched an R-rated movie. It was a horror movie, and all of the kids had nightmares for weeks after that. And I was very upset about it at the time, because I'd done my checks and due diligence, believed that this adult wasn't going to allow that to happen, or anything, like I trusted that. And then, obviously that didn't happen. And I was quite upset about it. And she might have been 11, because I wasn't really letting her have sleepovers then. But anyway, so differing beliefs between the values. And this happens in grandparents' homes as well. Grandparents will just sometimes not even, as soon as mum and dad are away, they just do what you said they couldn't do. So yeah. So the next one is lack of supervision and oversight. So not supervising play for younger children due to the children being busy and happy. So when kids are little and they're all getting along and everyone's happy, parents tend to go, oh, well, they're happy and they're distracted, hands off, let's go relax, and that can sometimes lead to, something happening in that time, or just, you don't have to be hovering over kids, but, just being around is important. And that includes online usage. Most children will be shown, well, we know that children see porn for the first time by the time they're, around 8, 9. That's their first exposure. And it usually happens by someone from school or family member, or they've stumbled across it, etc. So, you might not allow certain things online, but they go to someone else's house and they don't have the same checks and balances in place or the same supervision in place. And then they're seeing online pornography, or they're seeing, things that aren't age appropriate. So that happens. So, and not overseeing older children, thinking they're old enough to take care of themselves. Yep, our older kids don't need us hovering over them, but we still need to be finger on the pulse, ensuring that, one or the other or multiple kids aren't, leading them down a stray path. It was a very common, and Omegle has shut down now, but it was a very common sleepover game activity to go on Omegle, which was, their catchphrase was meet strangers. And so a group of kids would sit around, log onto Omegle, and they would be seeing pedophiles, masturbating and being asked for their Snapchat and stuff like that. And because they're in a group, they think they're safe. They think it's okay. They think it's funny, and it's actually really unsafe. That was one of those, things that were, those activities that were happening when Omegle was around. Omegle shut down because they were being forced to create greater security measures, and they weren't willing to do it, so they shut down their app. But there's other apps like that. And like I mentioned before, the drinking, the going off, my daughter, and I use her as an example for a lot, and she's just because she's a typical teenager, and we've had all of these conversations, but she's come home and said, oh yeah, everyone was drinking last night, and she, when she was 14, and that was normal for my age. And we had a conversation about that and safety, and, she was meant to go to a party on the weekend, but she chose not to go because she knew that there was going to be drugs at this party, and she didn't want to put herself in that situation because she didn't want to be the responsible one if something happened. So, if you've got older kids, you think that they're safe. Yes, okay, they're all going to be doing silly things and making mistakes, but have you had a conversation about it? Have you explained things to them? Have you given them an opportunity to make better choices, etc.? Anyway, getting off track. The next one is lack of autonomy and consent. So when your child's at home, they are more likely, I say more likely, but not always, to speak up if they're not happy, to tell you when they don't want to do things, etc. When they're at someone else's home, they are less likely to do that. They are going to feel the need to conform and go along with something that might not feel safe, might make them feel uncomfortable, because the pressure is there. They're in their friend's home or their family's home, and they don't think they can say no. I ate a raw potato. This is stupid. I haven't ever seen this friend again since she left school, because I grew up in a small community, so everyone knows everyone. But this girl left in year 7, 8. I went to her house for a hangout for the day, I think, or a sleepover, and she said that there's no food, and she gave me a raw potato. I was so hungry, I ate raw potato, like, for reals. We were, and that's because I thought I had no other option. It was really pathetic, looking back on it. Grandparents and older family members are also often not very good with respecting consent and children's personal boundaries, because they haven't been taught them, or they haven't been, it hasn't been enforced in their world, and they just think they've got their own beliefs around children. Children are seen and not heard. Children respect your elders, blah, blah, blah. So, that can be a factor as well, Adults. So we know that 90% of all child sexual abuse is someone known to the child. This means our children are more likely to be abused by someone in the family home or in the immediate family, friends, and their community. So not everyone that we trust with our kids are going to be safe and appropriate. We don't always see that side of adults because they keep it well hidden. That's why it's really important to know about grooming, which you can look at my blogs. I've got a blog on grooming. And, your child doesn't generally have the strength, confidence, or experience to deal with an adult in the moment that abuse happens. Most of the stories I can tell you about sleepovers and abuse happening is when a child's having a sleepover, they're asleep, and someone sneaks into their room and sexually abuses them, and they haven't, they feel frozen. They don't feel like they can fight back. They feel, they're terrified. Of course they're terrified. So we can't just trust adults in a home, in any home, including our grandparents and other adults, because we just can't. I know that sounds very pessimistic and very rude of me to say that, but I say in my blog, I spend time assessing adult behaviors more than I listen to what adults say. If they are acting like a safe adult, and I have a blog about that as well, respecting children's boundaries, not singling out children on their own, not trying to get them alone all the time. I will spend time assessing adults' behaviors before I'll trust them. That's how I have learned to know whether someone's trustworthy with a child or not. And if I don't think they're trustworthy, I never let my child near them, especially, early years, 10 minus 10, 0 to 10, should I say. It was when she got a bit older and I knew that she had a lot more confidence to speak up. I'd seen her actually speak up to adults, stand up for herself and advocate for herself, that I felt confident that, if something happened, she might be able to do something about it. So yeah, I've got a blog on safe adults and how to identify safe adults, because once we know what a safe adult and how they behave, we know what an unsafe adult does. And yeah, the next point I made is siblings. Siblings, friends, especially if they're older, are also a potential risk. 30 to 50% of all child sexual abuse is by another child or a peer. And you just have to read the TikTok comments in my TikToks to know that so many people have been abused by siblings and siblings' friends or neighbors or cousins or other children at school or other children that they've had a sleepover. When I sat with this, when I was writing this blog, I had a memory from my own childhood about a peer that I had a sleepover with. Back then, I haven't thought about this memory for a long time. And I don't want to get into it in too much detail, but basically it was an experimentation thing at 10 where it was her idea, because I didn't know what it was. I literally had no idea what we were doing. She had it coerced, probably the best word is coerced, into hiding in a walk-in cupboard and kissing and doing other things. So without going into too much detail on a podcast. But when I look back on that, I haven't been, obviously, I don't feel that it would come under the child sexual abuse banner. More so it would come under the experimentation banner. But I look back on that experience and I didn't know what was happening. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't know that she didn't really, I now look back and I say, I have a feeling something was happening to her, because she knew way more about this stuff than at that age. She had older siblings. In fact, I know that she went on to have a relationship with a cousin, and no hate or blame, shame to her, because I think that there was some grooming and abuse happening to her now that I look back on it. But I didn't think about this till this. And it would happened quite a few times whilst I had sleepovers at her house. It wasn't traumatizing for me. It was just confusing because I didn't understand it. And, I look back and I think, wow, there was stuff going on there. And I can't believe I didn't even think about it when I was a police officer. So yeah, so with regards to the siblings, and I've had people contact me about their children being sexually abused by older siblings or by older siblings' friends when they have sleepovers at their house. We generally let our guard down with older siblings, and we let the older siblings babysit and supervise kids. I talk about one instance in my book of a teen uncle and a 6-year-old boy, and in that it went on for 6 years. He was being abused for 6 years by his teen uncle, then became an adult, and then he stopped when he became sort of pubescent. And I, that 6-year-old boy was being abused. It felt nice. It felt good. Like similar situation to me. I didn't know any different. It didn't feel like traumatizing. But when you look back, you go, that actually wasn't okay. But sometimes older siblings actually hurt their younger siblings, and then there's threats and bullying and coercion, not just siblings, but siblings' friends. Like I said, I got contacted by someone who I knew, whose daughter had been sexually abused or sexually assaulted at a friend's house with her older brother there at a sleepover by the older brother's friend. I think I've explained that okay. So, we let our guard down, we let them supervise younger children, and then, it's inadequate. It's inadequate to let older siblings and older children look after children. There's been a massive increase in, children abusing children. And the highest risk factors are, or should I say, one of the risk factors is because our kids have unrestricted access to pornography. The other risk factor is that pubescent kids might not have someone to, we're seeing kids, young people have less interpersonal connections. So then they're less likely to talk to each other in person, less likely to connect to each other in person. Therefore, when they do go through pubescent stage, they're not experimenting with each other. They're not trying these things with each other. And, they are then, and in some cases, not all, they are doing these things with their siblings if they've given unrestricted, unsupervised access to a younger child. And in most cases, we see the most likely age group that is, assaulting or harming another child is the 10 to 14 age group. And the most likely child to be assaulted or abused is the 3 to 9 age group. And that's what we see. And we call that, and I've talked about this before, but we call that harmful sexualized behaviors. And that's the umbrella term for any kind of sexual activity between children. And we don't like to say assault or abuse. We don't like to call them perpetrators or offenders because they're children. And in my experience, children are children until they don't have the critical thinking, the reasoning skills. They are children, and we need to help children understand that we don't do these things to anyone without their consent, but definitely not to our siblings, definitely not to children in our care. It's not, I've done some social media about this, but, in order for, what's age appropriate development. So normal sexual, this is a bit off topic. Normal, what am I trying to say? Normal sexualized behaviors, because there is such a thing as normal sexualized behaviors. Normal sexualized behaviors are developmentally expected. So, a 3-year-old working out that they've got a penis or their vagina and it feels nice to touch it, that's normal. It's socially acceptable. So, it's normal for kids to experiment, but depending on whether is it consensual, mutual, and reciprocal? So they're old enough to know what they're doing and they can consent to it. It's mutual. They both want to do it and it's reciprocated. It's not one person doing it to the other person. And that socially acceptable stuff, it could be that, it's 2 11-year-olds having their first kiss. It's not socially acceptable for a 5-year-old and 11-year-old to have their first kiss. You know what I mean? And then shared decision making. Both children are deciding together that it's not one forcing the other, coercing the other, bullying the other, threatening the other. It's both of them. And in some of these cases, if there's a massive age gap between them of 5, 6 years, 7, 8 years, then how can that be? That's not normal sexualized behaviors. In my case, with regards to this girl, I was 10, she was 10. I probably could have said something. I don't think, like, based off that list I just said, was it socially acceptable? Yes. Was it developmentally expected? Kinda. Was it consensual, mutual, reciprocal? A little bit of both, but consensual, I kind of felt like I needed to because I was sleeping at her house, but I guess after the first time, I kind of went, okay, that felt good last time. And shared decision making, yeah, kind of. Like I wouldn't, I look back on those memories, and like I said, they're not traumatizing, but I'm like, kind of, where did that come from? That's what comes into my mind when I think back on those memories. And I've never shared those memories before. So I had a conversation with my husband the other day, and I told him about it, and we had a conversation. I thought, far out, like, so many things happen and we don't think twice about it, and then we look back. And again, I'm just using these as a way to help you understand some of these risk factors and why it's important to consider them. Okay, next one. Other adults in the home. Whilst you might be okay with the parent or adults of the child in the home they are staying, what about other adults? Will there be any other adults going to be in the home whilst your child is there? I've been to one too many cases, and I have, of a child being abused by visiting adults during a sleepover. This includes grandparents' homes and grandparents, close relatives, and adult family. One of the first cases of this, my first child abuse case, when I came out of the academy as a young green junior Connie, was of an 11-year-old who was abused at a sleepover. The little girl went over, she was 11, went over to have a sleepover with her best friend. The parents were having a party. There was lots of drinking, lots of adults everywhere, and drinking's never an excuse, by the way. This man had spent all night hanging out with the kids, playing Marco Polo and all sorts of things with the kids, water balloons, etc. And then the girls went to sleep, and the best friend, the little girl of the family where she was staying, the best friend, woke up with him in the bed with her, sexually abusing her, and she couldn't say anything to anyone. She froze, as you do. That's a normal response to abuse, obviously. She was 11. This big, hefty adult was, abusing her, and she woke up. When she got up the next morning, she went home. She didn't say anything to anyone until she got home and told her mum and dad. So that's just one case, but I can tell you, I want to say hundreds, but I can tell you at least 10 more cases where even uncles and aunties and other people have abused at a sleepover with kids and grandparents. So I want you to be mindful of the fact that if you're sending your child to someone's home, who else is going to be there? And then the last one of these considerations, the lack of online safety and supervision. So different homes have different opinions, beliefs, and rules around online safety. They might consider what's safe and appropriate to online usage, games, movies, or TV shows as safe, and you might think it's unsafe, or vice versa. I've seen my daughter, like I mentioned before, but I've seen my daughter's friendship groups, and in my job, I've seen kids exposed to inappropriate content when at sleepovers. It's quite high probability, especially if you haven't had a conversation around it with the people that they're going to. If you have a no technology rule or a device rule, you can't be be sure that that's not going to happen when your child goes to their house. In fact, it's a bit of a funny thing because my mother-in-law, my daughter used to go to her grandparents, and I trusted her grandmother and stuff like that, but I couldn't trust her with online safety. My grandmother let her download, before it was even TikTok, Musically, games that, she could have potentially, all on her phone. I had no access to it, so I had no idea what she was downloading. Never asked me, never spoke to me. So when I say that, these things have all been a factor in my child, like I'd have to pull her up on stuff and be like, have you even checked? Do you know what's this? Like sometimes grandparents can be the worst. They just don't know, or they don't care. And most of the time it's just they don't know and they don't think twice about it. They just, whatever makes their grandchild happy. So those risk factors, I also wrote, there's more to the blog, and I'm going to move over to school camp safety, but there's also more to the blog, and I talk about what things you should talk about with your kids and what things you should talk about with the family or the people that your child's going to. What kind of conversations you should have and kind of have. And, it's not, at the end of the day, if you don't feel comfortable or you're unable to have these conversations with the family where your child's going, or you just get a vibe, because you should always believe your gut, just suggest an alternative or say no. You know, change the sleepover to your house if you think that you can do a better job. And again, like I said earlier at the very start of this podcast, you have a duty to the kids that come into your care as well. And you have a duty to ensure that those children are safe and that you've considered all of those things as well. But, you know, if you can't get, what's the word I'm looking for? If you don't feel safe or you don't think that the place that they're going is going to be safe, then say no. Like I said, change it to your house, organize to pick them up late and drop them back off in the morning. I've heard a lot of parents doing that now where they're like, we don't do sleepovers, but hey, we can pick them up at 10:30 and bring them back for 7:30 for a breakfast. And there's a name for it, but I don't know. If anyone knows the name of those types of sleepover play date things, then let me know. Or maybe change it to a daytime hangout somewhere neutral, or just make a blanket rule of no sleepovers. Make so, you know, sleepovers like camps are not necessarily. I used to have all the sleepovers at my house because I knew I could ensure that. And you know, lots of sleepless nights when my daughter had friends staying over, lots of me checking in, lots of me blocking things, taking devices away from kids at like 8:30 at night and saying, right, guys, everyone hand in their device. I used to tell parents that all the time, like I take devices away from them. They can watch a movie and go to sleep. You know, there's other things that they can be doing that will keep them safe. And it might sound like you don't want to be that parent that enforces those rules, but I can tell you now, like my daughter's had sleepovers where I've, you know, checked in with the kids and I've been that safe adult, and I've had like amazing conversations with the kids. You know, when my daughter was 13, we talked about consent and sex, and they were asking me questions and you know, I always ask them, like, do you have conversations like this with your parents? And they were like, no way, my parents wouldn't like ever talk about this stuff with us. And being able to be that parent for those kids made my daughter feel good because she knew that her friends had a safe place to go. But it made me feel good that I could a void that I was obviously there. And I used to always go back to the parents and say, hey, just letting you know, the kids asked me some questions and I filled them in on consent. They asked me about stuff. Or, you know, and I would just let their parents know what we'd talked about. And most parents were like, thank God you're talking about this stuff because I don't know how to have this conversation. And that's just me, but I'd rather be that parent, right? Yeah, so go and have a look at the blog. It's got heaps more in it. I didn't want to overshare that stuff. But the other thing I wanted to talk to in this podcast, and I really didn't think I would take so long, and I can dribble like no tomorrow, I'm sure you guys must get sick of me, is school camp safety. So I'm going to try and keep this one short. I'm going to look at the time. So school camp safety in regards to kids going on camp. So school camps can be both amazingly exciting and nerve-wracking in equal measure. I had both really bad experiences on camp and really good experiences on camp. Again, I was usually trying to escape my home because my home life wasn't great. So for me, camps were awesome. But I know that camps aren't always like that for all kids. You know, it can be quite nerve-wracking, can be very anxiety-inducing. It can be really stressful, especially if children have any kind of anxiety around social anxiety, or, you know, they might have some medical issues, or they might have, I know that, you know, some kids still bedwet or have night terrors, or, you know, any of those things. You know, I personally don't believe that camps are necessary for children under the age of 12. I don't see why we're still doing camps in primary school. It's really stressful for teachers and for staff. It's a huge liability and duty of care issue. So some of the things that I wanted to point out with school camps is it's not just, and I've said it in the last one, it's not just adults that we need to be mindful of, it's actually kids as well. And again, you know, some children have been groomed on camp, they have been abused on camp, or have done abusing on camp. And like, I tend to focus on victims or victim stories, but I'm also out here wanting to encourage and facilitate conversations around children harming children, because they're children and we should be doing our best to ensure that kids never get to the point where they go and harm another child. And that's with no blame shame from me. I know that if your child's the one being harmed, you would definitely be feeling pretty angry towards that other child. But we need to realize that these are children and that there could be something else going on. They could have unrestricted access to pornography. There's a lot of risk factors when it comes to children harming children. And we need to have these conversations, and we need to have this understanding that they're kids, and we need to help them so that they don't become adults who harm kids. Now, on that point, only 3% of all children who go harm other children go on to harm children when they become adults. It's 3 to 5%. It's not a lot. So it's not a given that if your child, someone harms another child, does sexualized behaviors against a child, it's not a given that they'll do that as an adult. Doesn't make them a pedophile, for want of a better way to put it. It just means that we need to investigate why. We need to educate. We need to empower all of our kids to know what's appropriate, inappropriate, safe and unsafe. And we haven't done our job properly, and we need to do better with that. And it still happens even when we do educate, but we need to do better at educating all kids. Right. So that off my soapbox. My daughter recently, we went on camp, had a great time, but there was still some things that happened that weren't so great. She is 16. She's in year 11. She went on camp to a remote rural community. I had conversations with her before she went on camp about safe and unsafe, safety network, who are the people she feels safe on, what teachers, what people, does she feel safe enough to go? Does she feel like she would be heard and people would listen to her? Who does she connect with in her peer group that she can lean on for support if she needs to? So, and I had a conversation with the camp organizer, and in my blog, I go through a whole heap of questions for you a checklist kind of thing, like checking in with the school and before you give consent, what are their protocols? What are their first aid provisions? How many chaperones are going? How many supervisors are going? Don't assume that the school's got everything handled, because you might ask a question about this stuff and they haven't thought about it or haven't put in the plan isn't in place, and then you're going to prompt them to go and make it better. Speak to the organisers about your child's individual needs, medical conditions, any medications, mental health concerns, and get an emergency contact. You should be able to find out at least one teacher or supervisor will have a contact for you to be able to call. If your child's not able to take their phone with them, because that's quite, for a lot of parents, that's the biggest fear, that their children can't call them if they need them. That's why we need to have those conversations. We need an emergency contact, and we need to ensure that the teacher, school or organizer knows that you're expecting your child to call you or to get in touch with you if they're unhappy, that not to force them or, coerce them or dissuade them from contacting you. I know that camps are about, spreading their wings and becoming more independent and finding themselves. But a child, if they don't feel safe with them, then they need to contact you, their safe person. And that should never be, they shouldn't be dissuaded from ever doing that if they can be. If they really need to contact you, they shouldn't feel like they can't. And yeah, so these are the things that I have talked to my daughter about. Talk about the safety network. I've already talked about that. Go over their body safety rights and consent. Their body is their body. No one's allowed to touch their body, especially their private parts. If anyone touches them, you give them permission to yell, scream, kick, bite, whatever they need to do to get away. Why it's important to actually have that conversation with your kids is if, we quite often tell them, we don't use violence, we don't do this, we don't do that, we should talk it out, we should go and seek help from a teacher. And sometimes, I'm sorry, teachers, if you're listening, you guys don't do a good job. I know that you get overwhelmed with the amount of complaints and whinging you get. Sometimes when a child is in distress, you don't observe it or don't notice it because you're too busy with everyone else and everything else, or you're so hyper focused on what you're doing next, etc. So give your kids permission to make noise and demand attention or to do whatever they need to they will never be angry. You will never be angry with them. They will not get in trouble with you. You will stand behind them and advocate for them if they do get in trouble, because, it's really important that your kids know that you've got their back if for the right circumstances and reasons. And, talking through scenarios. So I talked through a few scenarios with my daughter before she went away on her camp. Some of the scenarios involved, you're in it's in the middle of the Pilbara where she went. What do you do if a snake bite? What do you do for a snake bite? What first aid do you do? What if someone falls over and smacks their head against a rock? What do you do for head wounds? Or what do you do for a broken leg? I talked her through, first aid. And then I talked her through, hey, so if someone was making you feel uncomfortable or a bit ick, or whatever the wording or terminology they use these days, someone's making you feel a bit ick, what would you do? What would you do if someone was taking videos and photos of you and you didn't want them to take them? What would you do? What would you do if someone was following you, wouldn't leave you alone? What would you do if someone started touching you and you didn't want them to? What would you do if someone forced themselves onto you or was trying to kiss you or harm you? I mean, at 16, these are potential possibilities in a group of, 40, 50, 60, 16-year-olds going away, away from home, having late nights, hanging out in communal areas and etc. Potential for that is there. So what would you do? And on the blog, I go through, some of the scenarios and some of the things that they could do to help you talk that through with your kids. And so with regards to that, ultimately our child needs to feel confident, safe, and empowered. And by reminding them of their safety rights and that you've got their back and that they've got options, and you're giving them tools in their toolkit for how to behave and act if something happens, because not everything's going to be roses and cool, and they've got to learn how to navigate all of the different personalities and the people that they're dealing with, and not all the people they're dealing with are going to be safe people. They're not going to be great people. We can't wrap them up in cotton wool. We can't ensure their safety. Whilst they're with us in our own home, we can do our best, but when they go out into the world, they need to be prepared for it. And that's the point that I make. It sounds like I'm some people go, oh, you're just scaring kids. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I know that this stuff works. I know that this empowers them and makes them stronger when they know that they've got tools to help them, when they know that they know how to handle shit. And, they feel stronger, they feel empowered, they feel safer. It's when they don't know how to handle shit, or they don't know who to go to when they need help. We can't always be there to shelter them from it, but we can give them proper education around this stuff to help them through it should it happen. And it's, with 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys being sexually abused before 18, it's potential that it could happen. It really is a potential that it could happen. So, if any of this stuff is freaking you out, check out the blogs. I hope it empowers you more so than freaks you out. It is possible to have these conversations without freaking out your kids. We talk about body safety with them. We make sure that they've got the groundwork and the essentials of body safety down before we send them on anything where they have to deal with shit on their own. It's not their job to protect themselves from child sexual abuse or from abuse, but, that's our job. But they need to know what it is. They need to know how to identify people being a bit icky or a bit uncomfortable or unsafe. They need to know who they can talk to. They need to know how to be empowered to do something instead of freezing up and even if they do freeze up, the next step is to go and tell their safe adult so that they can help them. That is how we're going to empower them. But if any of this stuff freaks you out, I've got other resources on my website. Obviously, I've just released the Conversations with Kids cards from 1 to 12. 13 plus is coming. It's just my brain has kind of had a fart and decided I can barely write at the moment. So yeah, they're coming as well. The book, obviously, my book with Operation Kid Safe is there, ready to go. It's got all of this stuff in it in depth about all of these topics and how to talk to them. My blog, my social media, everything, there's free resources. The podcast, there's heaps of experts. You know where to go. So hopefully that is going to help you feel empowered and have those conversations, because all your kids need from you is to be an open and approachable parent. That's what they need from you, and that's the best gift you can give them. So thank you very much for another episode if you got to this far, and hopefully I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to this podcast episode. Education empowers children and it empowers parents, and education prevents abuse. That is why I'm here, and that is why you are here. So thank you. If you want any further information or support, follow me on social media, either under Kristi McVie or KPAU social media accounts. I'll put the links in the show notes. You can also purchase a copy of my book, Operation Kids Safe, via the website at www.cape-au.com. Also on my website is a free ebook titled 10 Tips to Keep Your Kids Safe from Abuse, and self-paced courses for parents to help you in your journey of child abuse prevention. Please see the show notes for any extra information, links and help should you be looking for extra support. Thank you once again for giving a shit about preventing child sexual abuse. See you next time.